Well, hello and welcome. I'm really excited that you're able to join us today for this week's panel conversation with three leaders in local law enforcement. The topic today is really about how community perspectives impact the delivery of police services. My name is Matt Fulton, and I'm the Vice President for National Engagement for an engagement platform and company called POCO. We help communities build stronger engagement and track performance based upon resident perspectives and business sentiment. Today, we have an excellent panel assembled to share their perspectives on putting police needs and expectations into a community context. We're going to be talking about the challenges that law enforcement agencies are facing in understanding, managing, and then responding to public safety needs in their community and those they serve, particularly because of the challenges that all communities are facing today. Our goal today is that you will pick up a new idea, get a new perspective, maybe find a new solution, something that will benefit your community as you try to provide law enforcement safety in your community. Let me introduce kind of the format of our conversation. We're going to take a few minutes to introduce each of the panelists, and then I'll kick off the conversation to have each of the panelists respond to some questions that'll draw out the important perspectives and strategies addressing the focus areas. Following the panelists' responses to the questions, I'll provide an opportunity for the panelists to ask each other questions if there's anything that they want to explore a little bit deeper, and then we'll wrap things up. If that sounds okay, we will get underway. Let me introduce our first panelist. Chief Dean Smith has been with the city of Oshkosh since January of 2016 when he was sworn in as the department's 22nd police chief. Chief Smith, he's got over 33 years of experience in law enforcement, with 25 years of his career spent as a deputy chief in Suffolk, Virginia. During his time in Suffolk, he has had a wide array of responsibilities. What really caught my eye as I was reading your background, Dean, was just your involvement with the SWAT team for over 10 years, as well as your 18 years with the underwater search and recovery team. He's been recognized for his leadership in management training and is focused on community policing, creating partnerships, and developing strong ties with the community. He's a graduate of the FBI Academy and the Professional Executive Leadership School. In fact, he serves as the general instructor for the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice. Chief Smith is currently the second vice president of the Wisconsin chapter of the FBI National Academy and is also a vice president on the Wisconsin Chiefs of Police Association. And Dean, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
I'm sorry, about my what?
Your background.
Oh, yeah, it's 34 years of law enforcement, starting in South Carolina in 1987, and really actually spending 26 years in Suffolk, Virginia, learning quite a bit about this profession that we all are a part of in law enforcement. And I think along the way, our paths as chiefs, we've had our ups and our downs. One thing that I think all of us have done is we've learned from our paths that we've taken and are better for it, I'm sure. Being here in Oshkosh for over 5 years now, I've learned to embrace the cold a little bit and understanding I enjoy all 4 seasons. Where in Virginia, we probably had just 2 seasons on a regular basis on the ocean front. One of the things that's important to me as a chief of police is making sure that I'm engaging with my community, making sure that I'm available to them. One of the things that I try to do on a regular basis is if anybody reaches out to me, I try to make time to speak to them and allow them the opportunity to speak with me on whatever issues they might have, and then try to provide answers for them, whether I can provide the answers or I give them the right direction to provide those answers.
That's great, Chief. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. Let me introduce our second panelist. Tracy Basterrechea is a recognized leader as the chief of police in Meridian, Idaho. He's been with the department for over 24 years and was appointed chief of police just in January. So Tracy, thanks. Our congratulations to you and your new appointment. Meridian has a relatively large department of 129 sworn personnel and 40 non-sworn in a community of about 114,000 residents. Chief Basterrechea has been commended as a leader, mentor to others, progressive strategic thinker. He's also a graduate of the FBI Academy and has been an instructor with the Arrestment Force Options Training Program since 2006. Tracy, thank you so much for being here, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background.
Sure, thank you very much. Yeah, I started my career with Meridian, at the time, very small community. We've actually grown to just around 120,000 people. We're one of the top 10 fastest growing communities in the United States. So we're facing a lot of challenges with our policing. But I think our biggest advantage for us is we've built a very, very positive culture within our agency, and with a focus on that interaction with the community. And I think that, constantly repeating to the troops and leading our officers with intention and letting them know how important that community relationship has been just super valuable to us. They understand what my intent is, what our expectations are, our expectations on how to treat everybody in our community. And that goes an extremely long way for a city the size that we are. One of the things we often hear is it still feels like a small town. Our goal is to make sure that people feel safe, and I've really focused on those relationships amongst our officers, as well as those relationships with our community. And I think a lot of that comes from my personal background. I'm the son of an immigrant. My father came here in 1952 from the Basque Country and had grown up in, the post World War II Spain under the dictatorship of Franco, where Basque people were not treated very well. He wasn't allowed to speak his native tongue in his own country in public. And so listening to those stories, I think, and his view of how different the United States was has really shaped with me the importance of fair constitutional policing and focusing on building those relationships with our community.
That's great, Chief. What a great and impactful history you've had. So it's really interesting to hear. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Let me introduce our third panelist. Chief Shane Michelson has over 24 years of law enforcement experience. He has spent the last 6 years leading the Osseo Police Department as the Chief of Police, although he's been with the department since 2004. Chief Mickelson has a bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of Wisconsin, River Falls, and a master's of arts in public administration from Hamline University in St. Paul. Chief Mickelson is also an adjunct professor in sociology and criminal justice for Concordia University in St. Paul. Chief Mikkelson, thank you for being here, and I'd love to have you just expand on your background just a little bit.
Like I said, I've been at our community is a lot different than the last two that you've just listened to, last two chiefs. Our community is 3,000 people, so we're a very small community. We're also right in a metro area, so we are a suburb of Minneapolis. Unlike Chief Smith, I grew up in Minnesota, so I'm used to the cold. And I love all 4 seasons. So I enjoy my time here in the tundra. But we've got very different issues than most small towns because we're in a metro area. So our communication with our resident and our style of policing has to be more like a rural department, but yet we're dealing with issues that affect more urban metro areas. So I think we have an interesting combination of trying to be on top of modern policing, but yet doing it in a way in a community that expects them to be treated like a small town. So that outreach and that communication and having a connection with your community is very integral into how we police here with Osseo, just because of its size. And, as we know, in small towns, everybody knows everyone's business. So the more we stay on top of that and the more that we are in connection with our community just means so much more.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the values of these conversations is really the value of having folks from the different parts of the country, geographically dispersed, different size communities. Engagement is something that impacts every community regardless of size. And as a result, the perspectives that you share really can help communities across all segments of our population. Well, thanks for those introductions. Let's kick into the actual conversation. The topic today is putting police needs and expectations into a community context. Public safety is such an important responsibility that impacts every aspect of a community, and honestly, a community's overall success and their quality of life. I was a city manager for over 30 years, and during that time, I gained such a great appreciation and respect for the complexities and the challenges that law enforcement agencies are confronting every day, and all of the personnel that meet the daily public safety needs and expectations of the community. And the expectations are high. It's easy to take public safety for granted until your services are needed. Police departments are challenged every day with overlapping, nonstop, evolving situations that need to be handled professionally, respectfully, and in an appropriate manner. You're constantly needing to adapt to changing conditions and organizational demands, all being impacted by changing community demographics. And then you add on a global pandemic, a very polar political environment, higher unemployment and business disruptions, and questions about racial equity and social justice. Everything is such an important part of an overall quality of life in the community. So then the question becomes, how do you go about understanding the current needs of the community and being able to manage and meet them with the additional demands of trust, accountability, and equity for all? We know through our research that over the past 2 years, there has been a meaningful shift in resident sentiment nationally about police services. The community unrest over the past year has impacted levels of trust, accountability, and public safety priorities. And one of the interesting things about this research is really seeing where the shifts in sentiment have been. One of the areas where priorities have actually increased is in those areas that focus on building stronger connections and working relationships with police departments and residents and simply solving problems. Our National Police Services Survey is one of our benchmark service tools that's designed to help communities get this overall perspective. And this research is actually based upon 2 administrations of that survey. It's just an important aspect of having data to help drive decision-making as it relates to law enforcement. So there are 3 questions that we want to get into today. The first one is, what role should the community play in guiding or influencing the delivery of local police services? Second, what strategies do you use for managing community expectations? And then finally, what tools and methods do you use to understand resident expectations and priorities regarding local police services? And for the first question, I would love to start with you, Chief Smith. What role should the community play in planning or influencing the delivery of police services in Oshkosh?
So I believe it's important to listen to what our community has to say as to what are the community problems that they are concerned about. Understanding that one community member or community group may not have the whole picture as to what's going on within the community. We still have to listen to them. We still have to. We have a responsibility to understand what their concerns are, and hopefully find some creative solutions to solve that concern, or at least make that problem a little less impactful upon them. Listening to feedback from all corners of our community is incredibly important. In addition, sometimes resources are such that it's impossible to solve a perceived issue that someone has. So hearing from all areas of our community, all 4 corners, helps us prioritize what resources are available to us so that we can respond appropriately to community concerns and issues. We also include our community concerns that we receive through other means through our strategic planning process, ensuring that our 3-year plan mirrors what the community is looking for, understanding that that shifts and changes. So our review of our plan on a consistent basis is very important to us, understanding that our community may shift in what's important to them.
Chief Smith, is the strategic planning something that's done across all departments as a part of an overall organizational effort or plan, or is it mostly focused on the department?
We have a citywide strategic plan that we work on with other department heads within the community, within the city itself. But then I also have a separate strategic planning session with my staff, which works on action items that come out of the overarching city strategic plan.
And during that process, does the community get engaged uh, in any meaningful way?
We do that through our neighborhood association meetings. The city drives neighborhood associations. So we have meetings throughout the year through in our communities itself. And then I have an annual neighborhood association meeting where I meet with all the associations, sit down and talk about whatever issues they may have. But we also have, as I mentioned earlier, constant feedback where if they have a particular concern within their neighborhoods, then they can reach out to us specifically to address those. The other dynamic that we use as it relates to getting community feedback is our districts, our district officers. Each officer is assigned specific districts within our community. Each officer we actually issue each of our officers. We have 103 officers. We issue each of them a cell phone. We publish all the cell phone numbers. The community is able to call their police officer directly to give feedback to the officer. We also have software applications that allow for them to share specific issues directly to the officer. And through that feedback and the information that we work on neighborhood projects, that drives the larger goal of what we do within the community.
Yeah, and I know we'll be talking about those a little bit more. In your strategic planning efforts, just one final little question. Does the plan itself address, and I'm thinking about what other communities might be interested in hearing, does the plan itself address what role the community plays in impacting the delivery of police services in Oshkosh?
What role the community plays in that? Our strategic plan is in response to that role. There is no the community is going to tell us what it is that we are doing. We respond to the needs of the community. We enforce our laws and ordinances, but we use those constructively to really solve the problems that are within our community. We subscribe to a team policing model, which is driven by the concerns of specific neighborhoods. We have a community that has a business district. We have neighborhood districts. We have a district that is primarily a highway commercial businesses. Then we have older community neighborhoods. And then we have some new up and coming neighborhoods. And we also have a university in the middle of the city as well. So there's very different dynamics around the city that require different policing for each of those areas.
Yep, totally appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. Chief Basterichia, what role should the community play in guiding or influencing the delivery of police services in Meridian?
Well, I think for us, the first thing we have to remember is each of our communities is very unique. And so I don't believe in a one size fits all approach to policing. And the first thing we have to ask ourselves is how well do we know our community and how well do they know us as a police agency, as police officers, and what makes it stand out from others, and what are the community's expectations of their police department. We have to ask ourselves, are those expectations reasonable based upon the resources that we have and based upon accurate information that they may or may not have. So, and then ask ourselves, are we reaching out to the entire community to get the bigger picture of things? Once we have the answers to some of those questions, I think we can answer that question. And we have to remember that the police are the community and the community are the police. So they absolutely have to be a driver to help guide some of our delivery of services. What are those expectations that they have from a police agency as far as answering, say, for instance, a barking dog call? Do they expect their police agency to respond to those calls in a timely manner? And are those reasonable for an agency based upon call load and volume and things like that? One of the things that we've tried to do is answer a lot of those calls that some people may not think are important, but our community certainly does believe that they're important. And those are those discussions that we have to have with our officers. We get a lot of officers from different parts of the country who come here and they, come back with well, we never answered this call where I came from. And I just pretty bluntly point out to them, there's a reason you left where you came from. There's a reason you left that community. And there's a reason that we continue to answer these quality of life calls for our community, because those are the expectations that the community has for us. And we need to deliver to those expectations. So we reach out to the community in a variety of different ways, through citizen surveys. We provide a public safety academy, different things like that to get that feedback. And that's one of the things, since being a recently newly appointed chief, it's one of the areas where I have stressed to our officers that is really my responsibility, is to go out to talk to the community groups and really explain to them what we do as a police organization with the community. We have a very, very good relationship with our community, very interactive. And our goal right now is to build upon those relations.
That's great, Chief. Just thinking about it's such a fast-growing community that Meridian is. You probably have all sorts of different dynamics at play: old versus new, residential versus commercial. Do you have a pretty good relationship, or maybe you can expand on relationship with your business community or some of the kind of the community partners that you run into all the time?
Yeah, that's one of the things our crime prevention unit has really started working recently, is going out to the individual businesses, explaining to them what opportunities we have to offer for them, and to work in conjunction with them. The other thing I mentioned, we have a very, very strong school resource officer program, very good relationship with the West Ada School District. And we work very, very closely with them, as well as with our council, when it comes to approving certain residential projects and things like that, based upon, can the schools actually absorb the added impact that is obviously going to impact them. One of the unique challenges that we have in this area is we have a highway district. The city doesn't control our roadways in our city. We have an Ada County Highway District, as well as the Idaho Transportation Department, that we have to work with to come up with priorities and try to alleviate a lot of those traffic issues that we're dealing with currently. And so our city is actually working pretty diligently right now with our current mayor, trying to come up with some unique ways that the city can maybe work on some of those projects in a little more of a equal basis with the highway district, and help them move some of our projects to the forefront.
Well, that's interesting. That's kind of a unique situation with your street jurisdiction. So there's a lot of intergovernmental participation that's necessary.
Yeah, there has to be in very unique to this county, which is a pretty interesting dynamic for sure.
I'm sure. Thanks, Chief. Chief Mickelson, what role should the community play in guiding or influencing the delivery of police services in Osseo?
Well, in Osseo, it's a pretty tight-knit community, and the expectation, I know when I took over, was two-folded in our community. It was availability. So every card that I have has my work cell phone number on it. And since I'm the only administrator and I'm running this department on my own for the most part, leading it without any supervisors except for myself, that availability has to be there. And that is something that all of our officers over time have figured out, that there are going to be people that are going to call you on your cell phone rather than calling 911. We have a lot of intertwined families and things here in Osseo. The second thing is that we became a lot more involved in our social media and a lot more involved in just the community itself, by getting officers out of their cars and out into the community, talking and stopping by, almost just like you would hope to see in some rural communities, where the officers will sit at a fire and have communications with their communities. Again, this is such a small community. We're able to do that. We do, and we are listening all of the time. that's one part I think that is lost sometimes, is how much law enforcement listens rather than talks. And I think that's a huge impact on any community, is just being able to listen, sit with them, have open discussions, and have that open door policy no matter what. For years, we've closed law enforcement off to our communities and said, don't tell us what to do or how to do it. And now we're opening our doors and letting them in and trying to teach them why we do what we do.
Yeah, and that ties into kind of the research I was talking about earlier, where people are looking forward to those opportunities to connect and engage. Can you talk a little bit, just briefly, on, because you're a small department, you get impacted by regional issues, and of course you're coming into the trial this week, but the idea about the role that the community plays the role that your department plays in listening to regional issues that might impact on your community. Is there anything that you'd like to add or you can add on that particular thought?
Well, I think it's also having that line of communication to either business or residential about those regional issues. Currently we're dealing with a large trial that's coming into our metro area and how that could impact our residents. And we have started, again, social media campaigns to getting officers boots on the ground, going up to business owners, listening to what their concerns are of some possible future things that could go on. Also, we as a department send out a monthly newsletter informing our community on what's going on, and they can sign up through email. I think those types of outreach and really, listening is so important rather than talking sometimes. And I truly believe that as we get these issues that come in and affect us, again, in a large metro area, I have to be able to have my finger on the pulse of what the community wants. They're the driving factor in my mind on how we do our law enforcement. They employ us. They want us to do it in a certain way. The one thing I have really dedicated myself to is educating our public also, and making sure they know why we do what we do instead of just the how. And I think that's been very effective in allowing them inside and saying, you know what, that's probably the right way to do it, rather than trying to come in with sweeping changes.
Yeah, the big word I'm hearing from you is the importance of listening. It sounds like that's a cultural value that your department has.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Let's switch over to the second question. Chief Basterichia, what strategies do you use for managing community expectations in Meridian?
Well, I think one of the most important things when it comes to managing our community expectations is I try to find out if we're all speaking the same language. And a good friend of mine, Stephen Gower, used to point out, even though we're all speaking English, we may not be speaking the same language. And I think we see that a lot with the defund the police rhetoric that we hear. And so, we have to ask, what do you actually mean by defund the police? And there are absolutely some people out there that think that defund the police means completely abolish police work. The majority of people you talk to, though, when that comes up, is they're talking about putting an emphasis less on the enforcement aspect, or having police do some of the jobs that maybe mental health professionals should be doing, or those types of things. So that's one of the things that we look at. We know that how valuable our relationship with our community is, and our officers have to buy into that belief as well. And so when I tell our officers, these calls for reform, they're not going away. And we can't keep coming back every 2 or 3 years and going, oh, we're doing everything right, when our country and certain cities and things are burning down and there's rioting going on. We have to actually look and ask ourselves, what are the things that we can affect? And let's get ahead of the reform ourselves before we have people who really don't understand what we do, forcing unreal expectations and unreal policies down our throats. We're going to get those from those politicians who just want to appease the masses. And so we need to be in front of that right away, and we need to reach out to our community, and we need to show them how we're changing. What makes our agency different than what they're seeing in the national narrative? Don't bring the national narrative here, because what's going on here is very different than what's going on in a lot of these other communities. So let's talk about our community. Let's talk about how we police here, and let's talk about those relationships that we have here. And we gauge that, and we manage that through, we're really big on social media, on using a variety of platforms, from providing citizens academies, providing different forums for the community to come in and talk to us about different issues that we put out. That is one of the emphases that we've talked about moving forward since I've become chief, is putting together forums where people can come in and they can discuss our use of force policies. What is it that we're doing? That's one of the very first things that we did when I became chief. We had a town hall meeting where I discussed my goals, my vision, and discussed how we view use of force at the Meridian Police Department, what our goals are moving forward. And that seems to have benefited us very well throughout the community. And that's one of the things that we're going to continue to stress. We use comment cards through the City Hall for suggestions for either complaints or attaboys for our officers. We're redesigning our website to also gather that information for when somebody comes to our website. It's easier for them to understand the process that it takes if they need to file a complaint against an officer, or if they want to provide an officer with a accommodation or something like that. So I think the more access, as Chief Michelson mentioned earlier, is access. Give the community access to what it is, how it is that we do our jobs. I hate the word transparency. I really do. I think it's overused. And I think that when you use that word, people think that they get to see everything that you do. When we know that there are laws and different things that prohibit us from providing some of that information. So I think more of that, an open relationship with your community, and explaining to them exactly how you do what you do and why you do that is very, very beneficial.
Yeah, what I really heard loud and clear from you are a couple of things. Being proactive and getting ahead of it, and knowing your community so that you're talking the same language. I think those are really solid. Would those be your top tips for other governments that are dealing with this kind of issue?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is, when you make a mistake, don't be afraid to let the community know, you know what, we made a mistake here. For me, in my role, my prior role as the deputy chief, I had to do that a few times, step out and go, you know what, we made a mistake here. And people understand that, and people are very forgiving. They understand that as long as, if it's a mental mistake, that's one thing. If it's a mistake from the heart, that's completely different to the community. So when you hire good people and you train them well, you're going to be successful. But the community understands we're people, and we have to explain that to them. One of the things that I think has been very beneficial for me is explaining exactly how hard being a police officer really is. I mean, when you think about a brand new police officer, 23, 24 years old, and the first call they go to is a domestic disturbance. And here they are explaining to a husband and wife who've been married for 20, 30, 40 years how to be husband and wife, and they've been married 6 months. And then the next call they go to is a juvenile beyond control, and they're explaining to these parents how to be parents, and they don't even have kids. And then the next call they go to, right, is dealing with a mental health issue, and everybody expects them to be mental health professional. It's a very, very difficult job. And I think, a lot of times people have unfair expectations. They expect our officers to be perfect when they're dealing with people in their own most imperfect moments. And that's just unfair.
That was very well stated. So true. And, one of the things that's come through in all of these panel conversations is the human side of being a police officer. And you just very eloquently explained how difficult it is delivering the services that you deliver, especially for newer officers. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Chief Smith, what strategies do you use for managing community expectations in Oshkosh?
Well, I'd like to echo the sentiment that I very much message out that we're going to focus on what we do as a community here. Um, I try to ensure that our community understands what we do as a police agency to make sure we're delivering the best services possible. Overlaying a national issue on what we do here in Oshkosh is probably not a good way to gauge what we do as a police department. We, as many other agencies, I'm sure, have had to answer questions related to policies, have had to answer questions related to filing complaints against officers, and taking steps along the way to address those individual complaints from our members of our community is incredibly important to us. When you have some groups that may come in from outside of your community, again, trying to implant that national dialogue on your agency, you have to manage that very well so that it doesn't overcome your agency, so it doesn't overcome the mission that you've undertaken to deliver the best services possible to your community. You know, we discuss often with our community members what we are able to and not able to do. Some of our community members, they have an expectation that we can do a lot of things, but certainly we have to work within the confines of the law. So simplest task of, hey, you need to go over and tell my neighbor not to have his dog come poop in my yard. That's that may seem very, very funny or very, very simple, but those are some of the types of calls that our officers are tasked to deal with. And when we have to tell them that that's really just a neighbor conversation, that's not a police conversation, we have to manage their expectations as to what we can do. Or, hey, you need to go and there's a drug house over there and I need you to go and arrest those people. Sometimes it takes a long time to get there. And so you have to communicate with your community as much as you can, the limitations that are put upon the law enforcement agencies. You know, we also communicate with our community the progress that we have in our strategic plan through regular strategic planning updates. And as you probably know, we're working on dashboards to share with our community that readily accessible, where they can just go to the city's website and determine where we are on certain initiatives as it relates to our strategic plan. My community members really appreciate speaking face to face with me, whether I'm out in the community walking around at meetings, whether I get a phone call or an email saying, hey, can I come meet with you? As I mentioned earlier, I spent a lot of time just doing one-on-ones. And specifically last year during many of the protests, part of my messaging to the large groups was, come see me. Let's sit down and have a conversation. Let me tell you some of the things that we're doing here within the police department to engage in all parts of our community, no matter what area of the community that you're a part of. And those have been very successful because when you can look somebody face to face and share words back and forth, you learn that they truly are just people. We're husbands and wives, we're brothers and sisters, we're sons and daughters. We're just doing our career, our profession to the best that we can do to provide services to the community. And I think it's very important to have communication. It's very important to share what you're doing within the police agency. The simplest point of how do you file a compliment or a complaint against an officer? Just making it readily available. I know that our officers do a really great job. I know our statistics related to complaints in our agency. We serve a population of 67,000 people. We have generally about 5 or 6 citizen complaints a year on our police officers. And most of those are unfounded. I know what those are. I'm okay with publicly saying that we do a really good job, but as was mentioned earlier, we can make a mistake. But this is how, if you have a concern with what we're doing, you can certainly file a complaint. You can certainly discuss what happened in any type of interaction that you may have had with us, and we'll figure out what happened. We'll figure out if there's areas that we can improve upon. We'll figure out if we were just dead wrong, and we'll try to adjust along the way. We are also I'm very proud of the fact that our agency has had body cameras for 5 years. And part of that interaction is saying, hey, we have these cameras and we're able to go back and look at the camera and see exactly what happened. It's not always perfect. We don't always capture everything, but prior to having body cameras, we capture a lot more. So our citizens are very comfortable with the fact that we are able to go back and review what happened and provide them some answers. And it's important that we do provide answers. If there's a requirement for any type of written communication, we certainly respond as quickly as possible to that. I enjoy a lot of support from our community as it relates to crazy thing is that people love to donate to the police department. Where I came from in Virginia, that really wasn't a thing, but we actually receive more donations in our police department than any other city department. Dollars. Where if I have a program that I need to accomplish, whether it be a Project Lifesaver, whether it be I need to buy some equipment, whether it be our mobile command post, we can reach out to our community and quickly they respond. And never have I had an opportunity to develop an initiative that I couldn't find funding for one way, shape, or form. And that has a lot to do with the support that we have from our community here, where they believe in what we do as a police department.
It sounds like in Oshkosh, you have just developed kind of you've built up, I've heard the term community capital, in a variety of different ways where you have been able to build that trust so that then as you start getting into expectations, it's a natural conversation and not a forced conversation. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. It is all about trust. If the community doesn't believe in their police department, the community doesn't believe that we're going to really work to be the best that we can be for them, they're not going to support the initiatives that we bring forward. I hate to use this term, but we're the professionals in law enforcement, and we have to be able to professionally respond and provide tools to our community that answer their questions and solve their problems. They're bringing us their problems, they're bringing us their issues, and they're looking for us to provide some solutions to them. And sometimes you just have to be really creative on how you provide those solutions. The solution that they believe is the right solution sometimes isn't. And through working through the problem collectively with your staff, as well as your community members, the end result may turn out totally different than what was the original expectation.
Yeah, that's great. Very well said. Chief Mikkelson, what strategies do you use for managing community expectations in Osseo?
Well, we're heavy on social media. We use a lot of humor, which makes we've been told our Twitter feed is one of the better ones around. We instituted body cameras last fall. We've had squad cameras for many, many years, but we instituted body cameras, which then allows us to even be more humorous with some of the calls that the officers have and sharing some of that. But for our community, I think it's both the availability of officers and how they have those communications with our community that means so much. Every single call means something. And so I invest a lot of time into our officers and their health and their well-being, because no matter what I do or even what our stance is in our department, one officer who may be suffering or may have some, things going on in themselves could go out there and create a problem or create a state of affairs where people don't trust us anymore. And so to me, not only am I investing in my community and listening and reaching out and sitting in community groups and having an open door policy but explaining how we do things and what we do in every contact that we have with people. But I also spend money and time on the inside, on the health, mental health, physical health, and just the expectations of even our own officers and trying to handle that. There's a lot of documented cases within our own profession of what can happen to an officer over time. And so to me, it's very important to know what they have going on to manage our city's expectations and what is coming our way. They need to be resilient. Right now, resiliency is at an all-time high within law enforcement. And I think our communities expect us to go out there and do this job and do it well. But if you're hurting or there's other issues going on internally, and those expectations aren't the same, that's where we can get into trouble or get into a place where there's a distrust or even an incident that can happen. And so for me, not only are we listening to community, but I'm listening to my officers. I need to know what they're thinking, what they're feeling about current times. I also find it to be leading from the front and showing them I'm out there in the community taking calls. I'm a small agency, so sometimes I do have to. I still pull shifts. I find that to be very impactful to be out and walking around and doing those connections with people, but also having those connections with the officers who are out there that we're asking to do this job in a time that is tumultuous and in a time where, like some of the other chiefs have said, defund the police or what types of conversations. We need to be, to me, I need to be able to take what I'm hearing and bring it to my officers on a daily basis and have open conversations with them about what those expectations are, what we are doing together, and what each of them impacts in our community. Because everything they do, from driving around to how they might use a blinker or not use a blinker, to how they make connections with people, promoting those times when their outreach is above and beyond, I think is so important, so that our community sees what we really do. And so, having those conversations, I think, on the front end with our community and listening to them, but then also bringing that back and instilling that in our line officers. So every day they know how much impact they have. One incident set our country on fire, and knowing that that can happen and how that's going to change policing in the future, I think our officers need to know the weight of what they do. And to me, I think in putting that not only in my community and my energy there, but also my energy here in the officers themselves, also helps and assists with that community engagement part, because they're out there every day doing that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up the internal aspect of it. And it ties into Chief Basterichia's comments earlier. Because of all of the issues that law enforcement personnel are dealing with and being exposed to and being impacted by, paying attention to the mental health of your officers and just those organizational needs or community needs internally is such an important aspect. So thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a really important point, and sounds like you're paying a lot of attention to that.
Yeah, and I do believe that sometimes they get mixed messages, and it can get easy when you hear the national narrative to get down about your career. We have officers leaving this career at an extraordinary rate, let's be honest. I mean, I've watched it in neighboring agencies. I've been very lucky myself not to lose any, but neighboring agencies they're going out in the droves. I've never seen so many hiring processes out there. Currently, I don't know where we're going to find the people to fill them at some point. But we need to be able to temper that within our own agency. What are we going to do about it? And a lot of times I'll even sit with the officers. So what are your suggestions? What do we have to do to make this community better, or to help with you out there and talking to our community? What's the messaging that we need to have?
Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Let's switch on to the third question. And Chief Mikkelson, I'd like to start with you on this one. Can you talk about the tools and methods that you're using to understand resident expectations in Osseo?
We've probably mentioned quite a few of them. One of our major ones is our social media presence. I think that is a tool that we use. We do monthly newsletters that get sent out just from the police department. We do quarterly newsletters from our city, which we're involved in. I have a Chief's Corner, and each of our officers are expected to then contribute to these different newsletters. So they're having a say in different areas of our community. And we also put on listening sessions. We might call it Coffee with a Cop, or now we have an ice cream store that's just opening this summer, and it's going to come have a scoop with a police officer this summer. But those really are listening sessions to sit down with our community and be out there. We do have several festivals in town, and so the officers are mandated to be there and to introduce themselves and mix with the community. We do recommend, especially our night officers, since they're not seen as much, but the businesses that are open, is to go in and have conversations. You know, it's very interesting in a small community like ours where everyone knows the officer's first and last name, their children's status. I mean, they know more about them than I think they ever would in a larger community. And so that puts a lot of more, we're in this together, rather than just this one-sided feel where the community is constantly complaining. And so these tools of just getting out from behind the squad car door and introducing yourself to people and talking to them and being available, to me has been just such a great tool for us to get to know everyone that we're serving.
Are you still doing a lot virtually? I'm assuming a lot of your listening sessions are maybe virtual.
Yeah, and that again, COVID kind of throws a wrench into all of that right now. Virtually, it's hard just because I don't really care for these types of conversations. I think it was Chief Smith said he likes to eyeball you and have a good communication across the table. To me, that's more important than virtual. So we've put a lot of this on kind of standby, except for a lot of our social media presence, and then commenting too. So we're careful what we say, but we do comment on different social media sites from people commenting to us. And I just, to me, I think even now with masks, we still are asking our officers to put their mask on, get out of their cars, talk to people. Maybe it's at 6 foot distance, but at least it's human contact. Because I mean, that's one thing in our society right now I think people are missing, is some of that human contact and that the ability to really have empathy and express their views. And so we're doing everything we can to make it more humanizing rather than even just a computer or a social media site, is that we really require our officers to get out in the community. I mean, pull up on a barbecue, sit and have a conversation. Sorry about that. We have a bike patrol that gets our officers out and about too. So I mean, it's like get out from behind a squad car door, and that's kind of what we push. So,
okay, thank you, Chief Smith. What tools and methods are you using to understand resident expectations in Oshkosh?
Well, I think that probably all of us, to include those not on this particular Zoom meeting, we all do our neighborhood association meetings. We pay close attention to any opportunity to speak about the greatness that our police departments are doing. We try very hard to use social media in such a manner that is productive, understanding that social media sometimes is a platform that people hide behind and they try to lash out at you. We try to provide all the positivity that we can to our community. I often say that there's enough bad that's going to find us. Let's have fun at work and enjoy the work that we're doing and share the good that we do. We do an annual citizen survey that takes the pulse of our community. We use this to determine how our community perceives public safety as it relates to their belief of safety within their neighborhoods, as well as their perception of how well the police department and other departments within the city are doing. I like to joke with our fire chief, let him know that people like the police department here much better than they do the fire department, which is really a great thing for us, because generally our firefighter brothers and sisters, they enjoy a little bit better survey than police departments do. We also use technology through a web-based application that allows our citizens to communicate directly through this web application issues that they have with their particular district officers within their reporting areas. They can provide almost real-time feedback if there's something going on in their community with the officer that's responding, whether it be through sending them a text message, sending them photos, having direct conversation with them. This gives, I believe, through technology, an opportunity for a citizen to have their own police officer, have their own police department that they can reach out to directly. Spend a lot of time just explaining what we do here at the police department. We explain what limited resources we may have or where we can bring opportunity to affect change within the neighborhood. We use our community outreach vehicle, which is also our command post, and sometimes we do roll calls in neighborhoods. We'll roll our mobile command post out. It's a rather large vehicle. It whenever it rolls, people pay attention to it, and we'll hold roll calls in the middle of a neighborhood street, where officers will be out and allow citizens to come interact with them during the roll call, so they understand what's happening at any particular time during any particular shift. Social media through my public information officer, through our community outreach with our community closet. I have a full floor of space available where we have citizens and community groups that donate to us, where we can provide resources to families who may be in need. If they had a fire that occurred, if they have some situation occurred where maybe it's a family that is dealing with a domestic situation, and a part of the family needs to move out and they have no resources, I can provide with them with clothing, with food, with anything that they may need to provide an emergency support for them through the generous donations that we have within our community. It's basically a department store upstairs that I have that I can go through, and we do that really from the benevolence of our community. So we do a lot to engage the community so that we're not just doing traditional police work. We're not just out writing tickets. We're not just out arresting people. We're engaging them, once again, recognizing that they need to understand that their police officers are just like them. They're just out here doing their job to keep them safe.
I think that's great. I love your neighborhood roll call approach. That's very creative, and probably really very, very helpful for residents to get an appreciation for kind of the day-to-day aspect of what you do. Let me ask you a question. Do you have one of the things I'm impressed by our conversation with you is how strategic your department seems to be. And does your strategic plan incorporate some of the qualitative measures or goals that you have, and do you track those in any kind of a formal way?
We do track those we have quarterly report outs that we do using data to make sure that the work that we do here is impactful. So we will track those through another system that the city's brought in to help with managing the city's citywide strategic plan. We have some outward-facing benchmarks that we provide out to the community, but we also have a lot of minutia benchmarks that we track internally to make sure we're meeting the overarching goals of the city.
Okay, thank you. Chief Basterichia, what tools and methods are you using to understand resident expectations in Meridian?
Well, as Chief Smith mentioned, one of our big ones is our citizen survey. And again, we must be pretty similar because we beat the fire department in some of those areas, and we do like to rub that in just a little bit. Everyone loves a fireman, but we're doing a pretty good job of mitigating that here. The big thing for us, again, and we've all talked about this, but is that community engagement. We use our SROs in those schools to really get that engagement with the younger kids and get that positive influence. We teach some classes, various officers teach classes at some of the high schools in the area. We put on a lot of citizen academies. One of the things I like to do that some people make fun of me about is when I'm off duty, if I'm getting gas somewhere or I'm just at a restaurant, somebody doesn't recognize me, I'll say, hey, I'm looking at moving into Meridian. I'm here visiting. And I'll start asking them questions about the city, and then ask questions about the police department and how is the police department here? How is it viewed? And get some of that feedback, unfiltered feedback from the community. And that's been very beneficial to me in a lot of areas. So, storytelling about our officers. I was told one time you need to have a elevator speech for whenever you're put on the spot. And my elevator speech is really easy to do because I just talk about our officers and highlight the amazing things that they do. And people are really shocked sometimes when you explain to them, we have officers who, they've gone to a house on a call and maybe there wasn't much food in the cupboards. And so they've gone back after their shift ended and bought food and show up at this residence and fill their cupboards with food, or, go to an accident and somebody's car is undrivable, but they need to make it to a doctor's appointment. And our officer gives them a ride to a doctor's appointment or dentist appointment, or fills somebody's car with gas. And they don't want the recognition for doing those things. But we need to do a better job of celebrating those things and putting that out to the public. That's the one thing I don't think that we've done a very good job of in policing, is promoting really what policing is about. And that is about service. It's about service to the community. It's about service to one another. I'm a firm believer that how we treat our officers within the four walls of the police department really carries over to how they treat people out on the street. And so when we hire somebody at the Meridian Police Department, they're not considered a cadet. They're not called a trainee. They're given a actual police officer badge, and they're treated like a police officer. They're adults. They understand that there is a probationary period, and I don't think that there's any reason to make them, to belittle them or make them feel that they're not a member of our police department family until they've met that ultimate goal of being sworn, in as that officer. So when they come through those doors, we treat them just like everybody else. When they're an FTO, you know what? They sit at the same table as the rest of the officers. When we have lunch, they all sit at the same table with all of the officers. And I'm a firm believer that when you treat your officers like that within your agency, that's how they're going to go out and they're going to treat the community. They're going to go serve the community the way that you're serving them in your organization. And if you treat them poorly, if you wield power over them unnecessarily through the training program, it's human nature that when they have that opportunity, they're going to try to wield that power. And that's really not what we're looking at. When we're out dealing with the community, I tell people, I don't want compliance, I want cooperation. And there's a difference. And when we go on a traffic stop, I want that person that is involved in that traffic stop with me, I want them to cooperate with me. Now, if they don't cooperate, then yeah, we move to wanting them to comply. But we really want that cooperation. And I think that sometimes that's lost in the world of policing. And we've got to get that back. That, we're here to serve the community. They understand that. And they will let us know what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And, the only reason that we are able to police our communities is because they're cooperating and they're allowing us to police them. And when we lose that, it's really, really hard to get back.
That's very well stated. Thank you. And what a great message to give to your community, to your officers and other communities as you start your journey as chief of the department. So thanks for that. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
This has been great. Thanks for all of your perspectives. I would love to just give a few minutes to see if anything that anybody has said prompts any questions or comments or thoughts from any of you. I do have just one final question as we wrap this up. As with all of the COVID related issues and the civil unrest and those kinds of things, as you look at your department right now, what would you say is your biggest challenge confronting your department as we sit here today? And Chief Mickelson, I'm going to start with you because I know what your answer is already going to be.
Retention. I think managing that stress, being there for your officers and supporting them. What's been very difficult, I think, as we've seen this country and being a chief, is that sometimes you back your officer and sometimes that goes against the national narrative. And I think that is very difficult. But being able to stand up and know that you can, I call it work equity, right, within our community, because there's going to come that day you're going to have to rely on that work equity to hopefully get some trust. So if you're building it prior to an incident or prior to something happening, maybe they can trust the fact we'll get you through it. And that what, you trust the fact of what we're telling you is the truth. And so I'm constantly talking to our officers about work equity. If they see you, they communicate with you, they fall, I guess, basically the fact is they're almost friends. And that builds on that whole premise of we would like them to comply or not comply, but to cooperate, right? And that's what we're out here to do. And I think retention of officers, good officers is so important. And that to me is what is facing our whole career field, is keeping good people doing good law enforcement.
Okay, thank you. Chief Smith, how would you respond to what your biggest challenge is today?
I think our biggest challenge right now in the city of Oshkosh, and primarily probably in law enforcement across the country, is dealing with mental health issues and alternative call responses. How do we address that? We touched on earlier that we're tasked with answering all sorts of types of calls that generally when you look at the yellow pages, you can't find that particular topic, so you call 911 or you call the non-emergency number. And we are exploring alternative calls responses for mental health related to working with our county health department and interacting with them, engaging them to bring people out of crisis to a maintenance managed type position, understanding that mental health issues are deep rooted, but law enforcement generally are called when somebody is in a crisis situation where the normal conversation probably isn't what is going to help that person. We have to bring them from a crisis situation, de-escalate them without using catchphrases, but we have to just bring them down from whatever has caused them to get into their crisis and get them the help that they need afterwards, so that they are living a productive life with the true overarching goal of hopefully them never getting into crisis, and they're able to help manage whatever's going on to create their mental health issues. That's a big issue that we deal with here in the city of Oshkosh and really here in Wisconsin, and it's not going away. So we have to be creative in how we're managing those types of calls for service.
Thank you. Chief Basterrechea, what would you say to that question about your greatest challenge right now?
Well, I think as an agency grows, maintaining your culture can be difficult. And it's hiring for us really would not be very difficult if we just wanted to hire for skill. We have officers wanting to flee some of the surrounding states to come to work in our area for a variety of reasons. But you cannot hire for skill and forsake your culture. You have to be very, very careful about that. And every time you hire somebody from outside of your agency that's not homegrown, they're going to bring some of that baggage from the agency that they came from. And you have to be very, very intentional on who you hire. The very first thing that we talk to them about when they come in day one in our agency is I go and I talk to them about mission, vision, culture, and values of our organization. And we're very clear that if you can't adhere to our values and the culture that we are working so hard to build and enhance and maintain at our police agency, we'll help you find somewhere else that better suits you. We have worked very, very diligently to have the relationship we have with our community, and we know that we can't use that. So we just stress that so much. Like I said, it's easy to teach the skills. It's easy to hire for the skills, but you've got to make sure you have good people who buy into your message, who absolutely embrace your values, embrace your vision, and embrace that relationship that you have with the community and understand exactly how important that is.
Yeah, thank you. That's very well stated. Thank you for spending the time today. I really appreciate it. I didn't really get to finish the overall conversation, but all of your comments were just right on target. I mean, that's exactly what I'm hearing from other folks. But what I seem to hear from you more than others and other panels is just the The importance of that availability, that was kind of a message. I mean, everybody has said it, but I think that was probably what I heard most from you. I really just appreciated how the humanizing of a police officer, I think, is such a valuable thing for folks to hear, and all of you really presented that very, very well. Any follow-up thoughts from any of you?
Nope, I'm good.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. It's funny because people will talk about their friend who's an officer and what a good guy they are, but then they'll tell you how bad the other officers are.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of a funny dynamic.
Well, thank you for spending the time. I really appreciate you being here today, and be looking for your highlight segments probably within the next several days, I would suspect.
Very good.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Shane,
you.
best of luck to you and your department.
I appreciate it. Tk you guys. Have a
Thanks.
great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy.
Nice to meet
Bye.
everybody.